So the title of this presentation is the Gnostic and Esoteric Chemical Nature of Water. For a person like myself and for all of my fellow mystic people out there, my mystic souls that are always striving to be closer to nature and have a fascination with the natural world and with knowledge of self and how the two link together and how all these things link together to universal laws. Water as something that's so ubiquitous in most places, and something that is such a vital component of our biology, and something that for millennia has always attracted interest from spiritual people. This topic is a very important topic, and if you're like myself, it's something that you would have put thought into. So we're going to go over and go into, from my opinion, the Gnostic and esoteric chemical nature of water. Now, from a scientific point of view, a lot of what I say, the pure scientists out there will just say that's just the chemical nature of water. But in the video, I'm going to make links, and I'm going to speak about this in more detail in a minute, to the spiritual nature of water and how we can learn about our own inner spirituality and the spirituality indeed of the universe by observing water more deeply. Okay, so with that said, let's get into the presentation. So first of all, we need to kind of define the parameters of what we're talking about when we talk about Gnostic and esoteric. And these are some definitions or some word origins directly from the online etymology dictionary. So any of you can go and look them up. So if you talk about Gnostic first, why am I using the word Gnostic? Gnostic relates to knowledge, as it says, okay? So when you talk about Gnosticism in a religious sense, Gnostics are people that are outside of traditional religion. So within every religious concept, Christianity, Islam, Hindu, there are aspects of Gnosticism, meaning aspects of mysticism and esoteric knowledge within those particular religions. So as you can see, I've underlined, it says relating to knowledge, especially mystical or esoteric knowledge of spiritual things. Okay, and if you look at the Greek aspects of the word, it says knowing, good at knowing, able to discern. So when you have a Gnostic understanding of things, of something, your understanding of it is not just based off of a spiritual perspective, but it's based off of having a root knowledge of that, which then gives rise to that spiritual perspective. Okay? And because some people see that as those people that have knowledge of those things as special, then they will be seen as mystics or having like an inner knowledge, and hence the term esoteric comes in. So esoteric, it says esotericus from Greek, belonging to an inner circle. So when you have this Gnostic knowledge, it allows you to belong to an inner circle, meaning a circle of people who know some things that others don't. And many things that are spiritual, or we see as spiritual or religious, So for example, when we talk about the Bible, there is an aspect of Gnosticism that people have that will create a different understanding of what the Bible is all about. Okay? And once they have that, we can call that type of knowledge an esoteric understanding of the Bible or of the Quran or of whatever spiritual system, even nature itself. Okay? And that's the thing about modern day science, with its different degrees and different educational levels. As you go up, education itself, although we see it now as just academic, the reality of the roots of education are coming from Gnostic and esoteric roots. Our modern day universities are just modeled off of the higher learning adept systems that were mastered within the Greek culture, and the Greek culture then modeled their system off of the ancient Egyptian culture. And as we go far back in antiquity, beyond the ancient Egyptians, there might be more that, well, there is more, but that's not the subject of this video, that was modeled off of. And it all related to this outside to inside. It's this people who had no knowledge to people who had some knowledge to people who had more knowledge, all the way into the inner circle. And those people that were in the innermost circle were seen as the magi or the shamans or the high priest or whatever type of the yogis or the gurus. They were the inner circle. Okay, so we are going to be looking at water, and just in a basic sense, from a Gnostic and esoteric perspective. Okay, looking at the knowledge of water from a chemical perspective and seeing how we can apply that to spirituality and to ourselves as spiritual beings. Okay, so now that I've talked about that, why is this important? Well, this links back to the whole idea of alchemy. Okay, myself as a scientist, myself as a chemist. Okay, chemistry is something that I'm very passionate about, something that I've always been passionate about from even as a young child. A lot of it was rooted in this fascination with the idea of alchemy. So many of the books that I read were things about King Arthur, who of course had Merlin as the wizard Merlin. And, I read The Lord of the Rings, who had Gandalf. And unfortunately, most of the literature I was exposed to was European. But obviously, if I had been exposed to other literature when I was young, you would see a continual sort of linkage with those things that are mystical and mythical with chemistry. Okay, so for example, whenever we think of witches, we think of potions. Whenever we think of wizards, we think of spells, and that relates to the idea of alchemy. And what is alchemy? Well, alchemy is the old approach towards what we now call chemistry. And what did it involve? It involved the idea that substances could be transmuted from one substance to another, with a lot of emphasis being on the transmutation of some basic elements to more desired elements like gold. And not just because gold was wealthy, but because elements like gold for people in medieval and pre-medieval times had more of a spiritual power to them, and so people desired them, similar to the reason that they desire them today. So that's what alchemy was all about. And its origins, interesting enough, when I just talked about how the origins of the modern education system, including chemistry, came from the Greek root out of the ancient Egyptian schools, as well as the Hindu schools, alchemy itself as a word, you can see here, says, from this again is from the online etymological dictionary, talks about Kamaya, the Greek Kamaya, meaning the old writings of the Egyptians. Okay, or from the Arabic, Al-Kamaya. Kamaya meaning Egypt, or literally land of the black earth. Okay, so alchemy, with the al being the prefix, the Arabic the, and it talks about that down here. The alchemy is the art of the land of the black earth. Okay, meaning the arts of Egypt. So what did it involve? Well, for the people in the Middle Ages, alchemy involved it says, the both occult and natural philosophy and practical chemistry and metallurgy. Okay, so many of those people, including some of the great scientific heroes like Newton, were involved in these ideas of alchemy. Okay, meaning the way they approached science was not just from a literal, academic, practical point of view, but it was from also an occult, meaning hidden point of view, an esoteric and a Gnostic point of view. And it links, as it says, to natural philosophy, hence approaching the knowledge, the chemical knowledge of water. Of course, water comes from nature and is all around us and can be found in so many different forms in nature. From an occultic, from an esoteric, from a Gnostic point of view, aligns completely with an alchemical approach. And that is the point of view that I'm going to be approaching water. So I'm going to be linking chemical ideas that we know a lot more about now due to modern technology, modern understanding of chemistry, but linking it and rooting it back to the alchemical perspective. And that is the approach that underpins my discussions during this video. Okay, so with that said, let's get into some of the understandings of water, because water, people have been fascinated with water from ancient times. Okay, we only can go off of what things are recorded for us, so there's only so far that we can go back. But let's look at some of these understandings and these fascinations with water from various spiritual perspectives. So for example, the first one we can look at is Lao Tzu. Okay, you will know Lao Tzu from the Chinese philosophy of the Tao, okay, or spelled T-A-O, but pronounced Tao or Taoism. Okay, so who was he? He was an ancient Chinese philosopher and writer. He is the reputed author of the Tao Te Ching, the founder of philosophical Taoism. Okay, so within China you have a few main schools of thought. Taoism is one and Confucianism is another. Taoism is about what they call the way, which is allowing life to flow and allowing things around you to take its natural course. And nature is seen within Taoism as the perfect, quote unquote, imperfect yet perfect model of the Taoist way. Okay, so within Taoism, they talk about water, or Lao Tzu talked about water. Okay, and here's a quote from AZ Quotes. You can find it online. And when I say quote, you know, this is from writings attributed to Lao Tzu. It's ancient writing, so how much of this is true, you have to go and do your own further research. But the quote says, "Water is fluid, soft and yielding. but water will rear away rock which is rigid and cannot yield. As a rule, whatever is fluid, soft, and yielding will overcome whatever is rigid and hard. This is another paradox. What is soft is strong. So you can see Lao is using water as a model for a spiritual philosophy. Okay? If we continue to move forward, if we look at two quotes attributed to the Buddha. So the first quote says, as a water bead on a lotus leaf, as water on a red lily does not adhere, so the sage does not adhere to the seen, the heard, or the sensed. Okay? Again, using water as a model of a spiritual perspective. Again, using this idea of water being on a leaf, but not adhering, not sticking to the leaf, and saying how, as a sage should also be similar. Being somewhere, but not yet being in that place. This paradox, okay? Again, another quote attributed to the Buddha. Drop by drop is the water pot filled. Likewise, the wise man, gathering it little by little, fills himself with good. Using, here again, the Buddha is using water as a teaching method, as a teaching tool. And a little quote here, I should have made it a bit bigger. Apologies for that. But this is from the Bible, the Old Testament of the Bible. And there are many other references within the Bible. I just wanted to choose one. And this is from the Old Testament, which link to water and using water to convey a spiritual message. And it says, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So this is a very powerful verse because it's linking the divine, the spirit of the divine, and the fact that this spirit moved on water, on the face of water. So if anything can reflect or hold, because it says moved upon, if anything can reflect or hold or allow a surface for, in this case in the Bible, the penultimate divine force, aka the Spirit of God, to move on it, it must be a very, very powerful medium. Okay? So that's several examples from the Tao and the writings of Lao Tzu, the Buddha, from the Bible, where water has been used as a spiritual metaphor to help us to understand spiritual perspectives from ancient times, because these are ancient writings, aren't they? So we can continue, okay, into a bit more modern times, and continuously through the writings spiritual writings that involve water, you have this presentation of the paradox of water, okay? And of course, many people will know who this very famous figure is in the video that we're going to watch of Bruce Lee. And he talks about water, Bruce Lee being a Chinese, very famous, world-renowned Chinese martial artist who would have understood the significance of water as a spiritual tool, and for him also as a tool that he could use within his perfection of his martial arts. Okay, and on the right of the video I have a symbol of the yin and yang symbol from China also, and underneath the Hindu swastika. Okay, so if you're not aware of that, the swastika is not of German/Nazi origin, it is of Hindu ancient Hindu origin. Okay, both of these relate to the paradox that in ancient writings and even to today, water is used to convey. The yin and yang, meaning the black fish swallowing up the white fish, which is swallowing up the black fish, and that cycle continuing, the dark and the light, and the swastika as a vortex of difference between the left half and the right half, or the upper half and the lower half, whichever perspective you look at it. Okay, and water is the perfect physical, chemical model of this spiritual perspective. So let's see what Bruce Lee has to say. Okay, hopefully.
This is what it is, okay? I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
So there we have Bruce Lee talking about be water, and this links obviously back let's see.
This is what it is, okay?
Sorry, yeah. This links back to Lao Tzu's philosophy, where he talks about water is fluid, soft, and yielding. You can see that Bruce Lee is directly teaching based off of this philosophy of the Tao, where water is hard. Where he says water can adopt a form, but yet it has no form. So he's saying be as water, be as fluid as possible. And he's talking about that with his martial arts. Be adaptable in all the things that you do. So Bruce Lee, who was a very spiritual person, if you read more about Bruce Lee, he was a very spiritual person. Here is the most famous martial artist of all time, using water from an esoteric, from a spiritual perspective. And we've had several examples already of how water has been from ancient times an important source of teaching towards spirituality, towards mysticism, towards enlightenment. If we go back, we have the Taoism, and the Tao is all about finding the way. And how can we find a way? Well, we just need to look at water as an idea of what this way towards enlightenment through a Taoist perspective looks like. For the Buddha, the whole idea is about enlightenment. The whole idea of Buddhism is about non-attachment. And again, they provide water as the model of how we can do that. We can be but not be. We can be somewhere but not actually be somewhere, like the water bead on a lotus leaf. We can look at the Bible from the very beginning chapters of the Bible, where it's using water as a reflection or as a base for the Spirit of God to actually move upon. And of course, we have the symbols of some of the ancient philosophies, like the Taoist philosophy, like the I Ching philosophy, like the Hindu philosophy, as modeled, as exemplified within the swastika. also now being able to use water as a practical symbol, whereas these are, two-dimensional models. Even here within the yin and yang, you see this idea of the fish. Where do fish live? They live in water. So this existence, here you see with the swastika resembling a turbine. What turns a turbine? What spins a turbine? Well, fluids like wind and fluids like water. So water as a basis for spirituality and for deep spirituality and deep understanding of nature, the precedent has long been set. So now we need to look at some of the chemical perspectives. Now that we have an understanding of how the ancients used water as a model and why it's important, we can update this understanding and have a greater understanding now. Imagine if they had access, people like the Buddha, people like Lao Tzu, if they had access to people like Newton, people like Galileo, Archimedes, if they had access to some of the technology and to some of the modern understanding from a chemical perspective of water, how evolved their teaching would have become. And that's what we're going to look at now. Okay? So the first thing we're going to look at is the principle of polarity. Okay? The chemical principle of polarity. Now, for each one of these slides, underneath the slide, I have linked it to one of the principles of the Kabbalion. Okay, if you want to do your own research on what the Kabbalion is, which are a metaphysical teaching thought to have come from the teaching of Hermes, and we're not going to get into the depths of that right now, but there are 7 principles that arose out of the Kabbalion, which can be used to develop a greater understanding of the universe, a greater understanding of self. So my slide will show a chemical perspective of water or some other aspect of water, okay? And I'm going to link that now to one of the esoteric perspectives of mysticism based off of the Kabbalion in this case, and we're going to merge those two together to help us to create a Gnostic understanding of water. And that's the whole point of the video. So let's start with the polarity of water. And apologies, I will get into some chemical perspectives. So if chemistry was your favorite topic, then unfortunately that's the approach we're gonna take. But I'm gonna break it down. I'm gonna keep it quite simple. So on the screen, what we have is a chemical molecule or chemical diagram of water as a molecule. And water, as most people know, is made up of 2 elements, H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. Okay? And what happens because of the chemical nature of hydrogen and oxygen and how they bond to each other, where oxygen ends up taking an electron or sharing an electron with hydrogen, okay? The oxygen and hydrogen share electrons. So normally that would result in a neutral bond, what we call a covalent bond. But in the case of water, oxygen is what we call very electronegative, meaning it pulls the electrons towards the negative electrons, towards itself, towards the oxygen molecule. And so as a result, the water molecule itself is not neutral. It's actually become what we call polar. It has a positive side and it has a negative side. You can see both of these are the same thing, with this one being the red being the oxygen and the white being the hydrogen. Okay, so water, and within a water molecule, you're going to have thousands and thousands, not water molecule, sorry, within water or a glass of water or a body of water, you're going to have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. I mean, the numbers of actual water molecules that exist in the earth go into the, some infinite number. Obviously it's not infinite, but when you think about the amount of water that's present in the universe, in Earth, the amount of molecules present must be immeasurable. So the fact that we have all of these molecules and they're all polar is a very powerful concept. Polarity meaning one side is positive, one side is negative. Okay? And what's really interesting is that all the water that's on Earth is all the water that will be on Earth, unless we have the arrival of different comets that might contain ice and things like that. Okay? And if we think about creation, whatever your perspective was, but if we think about before existence and after existence, all the water that's in existence will always be in existence. And if it's water, no matter if you're on Earth or you're on some other planet which contains water, okay? And we already know that other planets do contain water, whether it's atmospheric, whether it's in a gas form or whether it's in a solid form as ice. Those water molecules will have a polarity about them. So this is the universality of the polarity of water, meaning that it has two poles, a positive and a negative. And we can apply this spiritually to the Kabbalion principle of polarity, which says that everything has two poles, meaning everything has its opposites. Okay? So from a spiritual perspective, you will have good days, you will have so-called bad days. You will have ups, you will have downs. What is above is below. Everything has its opposites. And this is an important spiritual understanding because it allows you to understand life more holistically. We can take one example. If you're having a day, from a spiritual perspective for me, if some things are not going well, the reality is I know that there's an opposite side to that, where for me, what's not going well might be for others what actually is going well. So my bad might be someone else's good. And all I need to do then is flip the switch to have an understanding that the reality is it's how you see it. It's what your perspective is on life. That's just one way of looking at the principle of polarity and looking at water and how water provides this paradox of how we can be and how we can have a perspective on life. So each one of these principles, we could go and do hours probably just on those principles alone. But to keep the video to a reasonable length, I'm not going to go too far in depth. I just want to cover each one. Okay? Let's go to the next principle, chemical principle. And we're going to look at the amphoteric nature of water. Now, within chemistry, amphotericism means that a substance can act both like an acid as well as a base. Okay? It can act like an acid, meaning it can donate protons, in this case hydrogens, okay, hydrogens, or it can act like a base, like an alkali, and it can accept protons. And that's just one definition of acids and bases. Okay? And water, again, showing this paradox that the ancients were aware of. This is the amazing thing if you think about it. The ancients were aware of this paradox of water without even having the modern understanding of the chemical nature of water like we do. All right? But so when you look at the amphoteric nature of water, it means that water can act like an acid, the H+, or it can act like a base, OH-, at the same time. That's the thing we need to think about. At the same time, it can act like an acid or a base. Now, this this gives a link now to the Hermetic principle of gender. The fact that within all things, there is a feminine and masculine. Okay, and when we talk about feminine and masculine, we're not looking at just the idea of the sexual aspect, the reproductive aspect of male and female. We're talking about from a divine perspective, a spiritual perspective, that there is a divine feminine and masculine within all things, including water itself. Whether you think the acidic component or the alkaline component, both of them are equally powerful. Alkalis can be corrosive, acids can be corrosive. Alkalis are important for health, to have an alkaline perspective in the body, but acids are equally important in the body. Okay, so there's a lot of talk within the health community, especially the alternative health community, about having an alkaline conditions in the body. Not every part of your body should be or needs to be alkaline. Parts of your body need to be naturally acidic, so that the chemistry, the biochemistry, the biochemical balance, the homeostasis balance of the body works optimally. Okay, so water has both of these natures, the divine feminine and the divine masculine. Whether you say the fact, like Bruce Lee said, that water can be both very hard, and you attribute that to the masculine side, and that water also can be very soft, as we know you can dive into water, whether you attribute that to the feminine side. I'll leave that to you. There's a whole other aspect that we go into regarding the divine feminine and masculine principles. Even the planets, those that have water compared to those that don't, or don't have lots of it. So when we look at Mars versus Earth, Mars being a planet that doesn't have as much water, they think that Mars does have some water, whereas Earth has lots of water. Which one is the masculine? Which one is the feminine? We've always said Mother Earth, but yet Mars is seen as the god of war. Okay, this masculine sort of principle. So water has this amphoteric nature, and that alludes to the divine feminine and masculine principle within all things. Another chemical perspective, another chemical property of water is the fact that it both can, water itself can give rise to adhesion and cohesion. So adhesion is when something adheres to something else. So you can see in this little model that I have, you have the water molecules, the two H's and the O, and they're adhering to a surface. So for a common example, a classic example, is if you take some water in your hand and you throw it at a window, the water will come and stick to the window. It will stick to the glass. And glass in particular works well because glass has also a polar nature to it, the components of glass. So the water is going to stick to the glass. In this case, you see the hydrogens, which are positive, sticking to the negative aspects of the glass. Okay, hence why glass gets dusty, because dust also sticks to that negative surface found on the glass. So we can use water to wash away the dust, because water is going to stick to that dust and move it away. So that's the adhesive nature of water. But water also has a cohesive nature, meaning it likes to stick to itself. And that's because of the polarity of water. Because water has a negative side and a positive side, it will stick to itself. And it's this cohesive nature that gives rise to what we see as a water droplet. A water droplet is the fact that the water molecules are sticking to themselves. They don't want to let go. Now, this is a very powerful spiritual idea when you think about it. The fact that water can stick to other things, but also can stick to itself. It can both build bridges as well as be a team within itself. Okay? And I've likened this to the principle of cause and effect. The Hermetic principle, the third one we're looking at, of cause and effect, that there's no such thing as chance. Okay? So, the reason I said this one is that one thing will lead to another. When you see a water droplet, you just see that one water droplet, but in fact that water droplet is linked, is the linkage of many water droplets, many water molecules within itself. one thing will cause something else to happen. Okay? And these water droplets then can then also link to other things. So when you throw water on the glass, you're going to see the water sticking to the glass as well as forming droplets. The principle of cause and effect. So when Bruce Lee says, be like water, my friend, he's talking also about the fact that you can give rise to anything that you want. You can both be the cause and you can affect things to happen, which are one and the same thing. There's no such thing as chance. It's you, this being that is in control of your own destiny. Okay? And how can you practice that adhesion and cohesion? In fact, this is the lesson that the Buddha talked about when he talked about the lotus leaf and the droplet of water on the lotus leaf. The fact that water does not stick to leaves is because they have a waxy cuticle. Okay? So the surface of the leaf has a waxy cuticle, meaning it doesn't have a charged surface, and water runs right off of wax, hence why we polish our shoes and so on and so on. So, as he said, the sage should be like the droplet of water. Okay? You can be adhesive and cohesive at the same time. You're on the leaf, you're sticking to yourself, but at the same time, you can have a non-attachment also. How do you create the non-attachment? By not sticking, by not being in polarity, in opposite poles to that surface, to that problem, to that thing. Be like the Taoists would say, go with the flow and not allow those things to stick to you. Water off a duck's back. All of these little parables relate to the spiritual lessons that water can give us. If you're having a problem, let it just evaporate like water. Okay? But vice versa, if you want something to happen, you can use the nature of your mind, the cause and effect, to make things happen if you align the polarity of your thoughts correctly. So, adhesion and cohesion, the third chemical principle of water. Water, such a beautiful substance and such a mystical substance. When we look at this physical principle, so this is not necessarily, it is chemical, but yet it's physical. So we're looking at the realms of physics now, which is all one and the same. When you get to the quantum level, the properties that we define as biological, we see are actually chemical, which we see are actually physical in nature, which we see at a quantum level all linked together. Okay? So this physical property of water, the fact that it can reflect light, but yet it's also transparent to light. Again, looking at the paradoxical nature of water, this two-sided polarity of water. And I liken this to the esoteric, the hermetic principle of correspondence, which talks about as above, so below, as below, so above. Okay? As a man thinketh, so shall his universe be. What we see, in the Lord's Prayer from the Bible, the Lord's Prayer starts with, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. On earth as it is in heaven, that is a direct attribution to the principle of correspondence, as above, so below. Okay? As we think in our mind, so shall our substance, our physical substance be. And water, from a physical perspective, reflects this spiritual understanding. And here we see here an image of a lake, a body of water, and the trees and the sky and the clouds are being reflected off of the water. And this can only happen, as we know, when water is still. When water is still, you can reflect, the water can reflect the image that's above it. But likewise and equally, when it's still, what light can also travel right through it. So as Bruce Lee says, be like water. Yes, let's reflect. When we are still, we are best able to reflect those beautiful things in life. Those beautiful things in life. But at the same time, we have an understanding that we also can allow ourselves to be a medium for the light to pass through. So we're doing two things at the same time. If you were underneath this body of water, you would clearly see the light coming down, even though it's being reflected on the surface also. Okay? So, as above, so below, as below, so above. We can reflect our life and our mind, our life, our physical life, our manifested life will reflect what is above, just like you see that body of water. Okay? And if we allow the light, meaning the positive aspects of light, those things that illuminate us, if we allow ourselves to be a medium, we can both reflect that outwards as well as allow it to come within and illuminate ourselves and make our life be more fulfilling. Really powerful esoteric and Gnostic understanding of water using the principle of correspondence. So let's move on to the next one. Again, as I said, with each one of these, you could spend hours not only talking about the chemical aspect of water and its chemical nature from chemistry perspective, but from the esoteric and spiritual perspective, you could spend hours talking about that alone. Especially this one, which is the crystal structure of water. Now, when we say crystal, we mean in its solid form, okay? So a crystal is a regular arrangement of atoms in a lattice form, okay, meaning a regular arrangement as a solid. All right? As a gas, things are randomly arranged, okay? And as a liquid, things can flow over each other, okay? But as things solidify, they can become crystalline, meaning they can become, the atoms inside can become regularly arranged, or they can be amorphic, meaning no shape and no form. And things that are crystal tend to have a defined structure, and they have planes. So, for example, well, let's just look at water, okay? So water, when it solidifies, it actually forms a hexagonal crystal structure. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so if we look at the crystal structure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, here again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's forming a hexagonal crystal structure. And as we know, from an etymological perspective, how do people within the black arts curse people? They say, well, we put a hex on you. Well, what do they mean? They mean hexagon. So water has this hexagonal nature as a crystal, very mystical nature, okay, as a crystal. All crystals and all shapes have spiritual natures, including the line as a shape, okay, the square within masonry, the triangle, okay, the pyramid, which is just a three-dimensional triangle, the sphere, okay, from the Platonic structures like the dodecahedron or whatever the shape that Plato had, all of his different spheres, which he thought that matter was created out of. Shapes in general have mystical interpretation through sacred mathematics. But so when we look at water, water has this hexagonal shape, okay? And so water, when we freeze it, when it becomes solidified, it forms a crystal, what we know as ice. And we know how beautiful ice can be. Ice can be transparent, it can form different shapes, it's incredibly hard. The crystal structure of water arises many from the crystal structure of water arises many of the properties we associate with water. Okay, this soft liquid form, but when it is in solid form, it's incredibly hard. Okay, but can be incredibly beautiful as well as incredibly destructive. So let's link this crystal structure, this chemical structure, chemical understanding of water, that it forms a crystal structure, to the Hermetic principle of mentalism. Okay, that all is mind. Everything that happens has to be a result of a mental state which precedes it. So if you think, we have these fluid thoughts, okay, and from an alchemical point of view, they were always trying to transmute things, to bring things into existence. Well, water shows us the way, the metaphysical way of doing this. How? Well, everything is mind. So if you can bring your thoughts together, whether it's you or whether it's a group of you, which is even more powerful, you can solidify your thoughts. You can make them more crystalline. Okay? And from that crystalline thought can manifest existence and manifest things into reality. Now, the thing about it is that this manifestation, just like water, can be beautiful, like icicles, which look so beautiful, or it can be destructive, because we know that ice can both be something that is very powerfully positive, okay, constructive, okay, like an icicle, but at the same time is destructive. And the reality is water is both at the same time. So let's just use ice for example. Very quickly, we can talk about something like the freeze-thaw cycle. So when rock freezes, when water gets inside rock, into the cracks of rock, it will freeze, it will expand, okay? It causes the rock to break down, which is destructive. But that destructive mechanism brings about soil or components of soil, which things can grow from. And without that freeze-thaw cycle, we wouldn't have the sort of cyclic nature of the physical aspects of the earth. So again, we need to be very careful with this understanding. Hence why you had, the good wizards and the bad wizards. They both had the same magical knowledge, esoteric and Gnostic knowledge, but it all depends on what you wanted to use your mind for. So water is a very good model of how we can use the principle of mentalism. Let's keep going. The thing about water is very unique, that unlike many substances, okay, like metals for example, when they cool down, metals, they contract, okay? So if you want to get a top off of a jar, a metal top, you can run it under some hot water and it's going to expand. But water, on the other hand, when you cool it down and you freeze it, because of its crystalline structure, it actually expands, okay? So this is an important spiritual principle, that we can use the consolidation of our thoughts, the crystallization of our thoughts, to actually expand our nature. And as I said just in the previous slide, this can be either a constructive force or a destructive force, neither of which are good or bad. Okay, construction and destruction are not good nor bad. They're both just a particular direction. One goes out, the other goes in. One breaks apart, the other brings together. Both important, both useful. So for us as spiritual beings, we're going to use water, understanding that as we bring our thoughts together, like water when it's frozen, when we cool things down, slow things down, we actually can expand things. Okay, and that's due to the crystalline nature of water, the fact that when you do cool it down, it forms this hexagonal crystal, and that hexagonal crystal locks in space within it. So the volume within the crystal actually gets larger. Hence why water floats on ice. Sorry, ice floats on water. Ice is less dense. It's a solid form of water that's less dense than its liquid form, which is unheard of. Okay? The mysticism of water. The wave nature of water is the next physical principle. Hopefully this plays while I'm watching it. Good. So I'll just play the video while I'm talking about the wave nature of water. So water, as we know, if you sit by an ocean, sit by the ocean, you see the waves actually coming in and out. Very calm day. And even then, because of the nature of water, how it carries energy through it, you could still seeing waves still. So water has this wave nature, okay? And this was understood in hieroglyphics. There was a symbol for the wave nature, a ripple of water. And so water was that important that they actually had a hieroglyphic symbol that was used for it. And the wave nature in particular was important. So this is the principle of vibration, the hermetic principle of vibration, that motion is manifest in everything in the universe, that nothing rests, everything moves, vibrates and circles. Within the Native American culture, they look at the omnipotent, the divine, as the great circle, the great spirit, the great light, the great circle. Okay? So it's an understanding, it's a way to understand the divine is the great circle. Okay? So if you think about a circle, it's a line, but within that line, at the top, there's no division within the circle. Everything is just constantly moving, yet it's all one. And that's the way nature of water. It's one body of water, but yet it's constantly moving back and forth. And this nature of water, the fact that motion is manifest in everything, is important for us to understand that things are constantly moving on. One of my things that if I fell down, my mom would always say, still to this day, she would say, this too shall pass. So having that understanding that, like water, things are and so you need to just go with the flow. Okay? You need to go with the flow, because even if you go with the flow, that doesn't mean that you're time, because you're still a part of that one body of water. Everything else is also flowing. And this relates, of course, back to the crystallized structure of water, okay, that even as a crystal, we know that their atoms are always moving. So even ice itself looks so solid, but within that ice, the individual atoms are always moving and oscillating and vibrating. Okay? The principle of vibration, motion is manifest in everything in the universe. We say this colloquially, we'll say, keep it moving. Or if someone is not doing the right thing, you say, keep it moving. Okay? Or if something is going right, you might say, keep it moving. If someone's giving you a massage or something, you say, keep it moving, in your mind. Keep it moving. Motion is manifest in everything. Okay? And Bruce Lee would have, looked at that aspect of for his martial arts. A moving target is harder to hit. Okay? Keep it moving. Understand that the vibration, that the universe is constantly vibrating. There's a constant ebb and flow. Good. So let's do a quick recap just so I can see where I am. We've got 1, the principle of polarity. 2, the principle of gender. The polarity of water, the chemical nature of water being its polarity, and we link that to the Hermetic principle of polarity. The amphoteric nature of water, and we link that to the Hermetic principle of gender. The physical properties of water being that it can both be adhesive and cohesive, and we link that to the Hermetic principle of cause and effect. So that's 3. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. The fact that water can be both reflective yet transparent, and we link that to the principle of correspondence. So that's 4. The crystal structure of water, and we link that to the principle of mentalism, all is mind, 5. And the fact that water is constantly moving, the wave nature of water, and we link that to the principle of vibration. Okay, and when we talked about wave nature, again, we could go on for hours about the esoteric, metaphysical, spiritual perspective of waves, okay, and vibration and motion. Very, very deep topic, but we're going to save that for another time. So this is going to be the final one. The resonant frequency of water. So when we talk about resonance, we're talking about movement, okay? We're talking about vibration, but this vibration, this resonance is brought on by energy from an external source. And if you look here, we have a water molecule, and the molecule is both stretching, it's moving. So the arms of the water molecule are doing this, okay? And it's also twisting at the bottom, okay? Here the arms are doing this, and it's also going up and down, all right? And here it's like a swing, okay? It's going up and down, but back and forth like a pendulum. So the water molecule is resonating. Now, what can bring about this resonance? Okay. Well, in this case, we're looking at the electromagnetic spectrum. So we see here on the bottom wavelength, and we see ultraviolet, we see visible light, we see the infrared, okay, and then we see over here. So what we have, infrared, radio waves, microwaves. So we're going to get over here into the high frequency. We're talking about radio waves and microwave stuff like that. So much larger wavelengths. So you can see it says 1 millimeter, and then this says 10 millimeters. Okay, and then we're looking at the absorption on the y-axis. So what is water actually absorbing? Okay, so here you can see that the water molecule has a resonance spectrum. Here the absorption is quite high, okay, and then there is a drop in absorption, and then it spikes again here, okay, and then starts to tailor off. Now, what does this mean? Well, this shows that water can absorb ultraviolet rays, so hence ultraviolet rays can be quite energetic. It's going to absorb ultraviolet rays, all right? And it can also absorb infrared waves. Now, what's actually absorbing it is the bonds within the molecule. So you see the hydrogens are bonded to the oxygen. And it's these bonds, which remember are just formed of electrons, that actually are going to absorb the energy, okay? But just because the molecule absorbs the energy, that does not mean that it's going to create resonance in the molecule. Resonance means that it's going to start to oscillate at a certain frequency, okay, and vibrate on its own in a specific pattern, okay? So the resonant frequency of water is different for different wavelengths. And when we think about infrared, water has a resonant frequency in the infrared region, okay, in the infrared region. So we're going to link this resonant frequency of water to the principle of rhythm. That in everything, there is not only motion, like we just talked about, that there's not any vibration, but rhythm. Vibration and rhythm are inextricably linked, but they are different. Vibration just means to move back and forth, whereas rhythm means to move back and forth in a specific defined frequency. Okay? And water has a specific resonant frequency within it. Okay? And we want now to look at the Hermetic principle that within everything, if you can find that resonant frequency, you can cause rhythm. Okay? And hence why, from a magical point of view, an esoteric and an occultic point of view, we can find resonance as a way to cause other matter to be influenced. Hence why we had the mythical traditions of the wizards and witches and warlocks. They would be able to find the resonance within other materials and cause different things to manifest. Okay, so when they cast a spell, or when they use sounds through the casting of a spell, or they might use an object like a wand, or they might use chanting, or within the African culture they might use an altar or an oracle or whatever of these spiritual tools, these occultic tools. It's based off of the whole idea of finding a specific resonant frequency, a rhythmic frequency, and not necessarily on the electromagnetic perspective, but on other perspectives that we as scientists are still just beginning to understand from a quantum level. Okay? Because they'll talk about things like dark matter, which most of the universe is made up of, that they can detect but they cannot detect. They'll talk about things like neutrinos, which can go through everything and are always around us, but you can't really detect them. Okay? This resonant frequency and ability to find resonance frequency within those things that we want to influence is very, very important, and is very, very a very spiritual idea also. How can we find resonance, and how can we create resonance towards positivity, not only within ourselves, not only within our fellow beings, not only within the earth and nature, but from a universal perspective. So when we are meditating, for example, are we clearing our minds and making our minds still like that reflective surface of water, so that the Spirit of God can move upon that reflective surface, but at the same time the energy we're sending out, is it on a resonant frequency of positivity? Okay, so the principle of rhythm is inherent within water. Let's finalize and finish this presentation with one of the most powerful aspects of water. And this is not linked to any one hermetic principle. This is not linked to any one chemical nature or physical nature of water. This brings all of them together within its entirety, within its infinite complexity, and how they link together, and the reality that water is synonymous with life. Water is synonymous with life. So when scientists are looking for other planets where life might exist, life as we define it, okay, they look for water first. So for example, this planet K218b, this exoplanet, which is huge, much, much, much larger than Earth, they feel it might contain life because it contains water. Okay, it contains atmospheric water, but nevertheless, they feel it might contain life, and they still have to find out more about it. All right. And if we look at some of the facts, our bodies are composed of so much water. And this is a little diagram where it says the fetus is 90% water, and as we get older, we have less and less water. So that shows you right away that the foundation of life is based on water. We are We are nested in a body of water within our mother's womb, and we're born with that water cushioning us as we come out. Okay? The sign that life is about to happen is, oh, the water's broke. And as we get older, if we don't maintain that water balance, and that water abundance in our body, it will lead to quicker aging. If we look at our cells themselves, the cytoplasm, which makes up the majority of a cell, is water. Okay? 80% water. So even at the micro level, the cellular level, water represents this essential substance. If we look at the whole idea of how we interact with nature, and we look at the photosynthesis equation, without water, we would not have oxygen, which is another important esoteric substance, because with oxygen comes fire, one of the four elements. Okay? And water is one of the four elements that we know. And even our blood is made up of, so much of it is water. As I said, the blood here is 55% plasma, and within the plasma is 91% water. Hence why water is such an important aspect of our physiology. And this is just linked to our earth itself, where water is continually cycled around the earth. Although the atmosphere doesn't contain as much water as our body, the earth itself contains huge amounts of water that continually cycle through the water cycle, through the movement of the atmosphere, of water in the atmosphere, evaporation and precipitation and percolation through the earth. The cycles of nature are, water is critical within the cycles of nature. And it's because of all of those chemical principles that I mentioned earlier, and how they link together, that water plays such an important role in our earth, in our Mother Earth, and in our universe in general. Okay? Hence why we said when they look for life, they're going to be looking primarily for the existence of water. So let's just close by reminding ourselves that from a chemical perspective, if we go and study chemistry, and I tell my students this all the time, yes, you can study chemistry for the facts, for the knowledge, the rote knowledge of it. You can even go beyond and say, no, I'm not just studying it for the facts and the rote knowledge. I'm going to now apply it to make people's lives better. But there's also another perspective which we can look at the chemical nature of substances, in this case water, and that is the Gnostic, the Esoteric, the occultic, the spiritual, whatever way you want to call it, the hidden wisdom within. And within the water molecule, within the water as a body, as a substance, this thing that makes us up, this thing that makes our earth up, there are so many hidden mysteries that we can use as both lessons and mechanisms towards creating a deeper spiritual understanding of ourselves, those around us, and the universe. Give thanks for listening to my presentations. I'm Dr. David Roots.